Telly Savalas was a Greek-American actor who was working as an actor from the early 1960s till the mid-80s. He played Kojak, a Greek-American detective in a TV show by that name. This was in the early to mid-1970s. This was, at one time, the most popular TV show in the entire world. This was back in the day when there were only 3 networks and most people had at best 5 or 6 working channels on their televisions. Anyway, a few years before Telly Savalas died, he told a ghost story to an Australian ghost program popular in the early 1990s. Here is the story. One day after dropping off a date in 1958, Telly headed home to his house on Long Island when he runs out of gas. He takes his gas can from his car and goes to a White Castle, the original fast food place, to ask where an all-night gas station is. He is told he has to walk through the woods, so he does. As he emerges on the other side, a fellow out of nowhere asks him, "Hey, can I give you a ride?" It's a man in a car wearing an all-white suit with a high-pitched voice. Telly agrees, so they take off towards the gas station. Telly realizes he's broke, as this was way before ATMs, and the man says, "I can loan you $1, as in those days, $1 was worth about 15 to 20 of today money. Telly thanks him and asks for his address so that he can mail him $5. While Telly is filling up his gas can, the man writes down his name, address, and phone number on a piece of paper which he hands him. The man drives Telly back to his car. Telly puts the gas in, and they have to push his car to start it. Telly drives off, thinking he's definitely going to send the man $5. The next day, he takes the paper and calls the number, thinking he would just drive to the man's house and drop the money off. But a woman answers the phone. "My husband's been dead for over 2 years," and hangs up. Telly does not let it go, but drives to the address on the piece of paper with the $5. The woman answers and lets him in. She shows him a photograph, and yes, that was the man. It turns out over 2 years ago, the man had shot himself in the throat. Now that would explain his high-pitched voice. Telly asked if his husband had a high-pitched voice, and the woman replied that no, it was low-pitch and deep. He couldn't understand why this happened to him. He wasn't a religious man. He enjoyed women and booze. He couldn't think of a single reason why it had occurred, why a dead man would appear driving a real car, loaning him a real $1, and helping him out like that. But perhaps the ghost appeared not for the sake of Telly, but for the sake of his wife. Perhaps she was considering taking her own life too. We don't know. Telly confirmed to the wife that the man was, and still exists, in another form. And that perhaps that's why Telly had it happen to him, because the man just needed a messenger to let his wife know that he was okay. I grew up in a house with both parents and a sister, in a fairly new single-story house with no paranormal history. My sister is just shy of 2 years younger than me. At birth, my sister and I had been baptized and grew up in a Catholic family. Our parents weren't very churchy people, but our grandparents were the old-school heavy Catholic type. My parents would recall stories to us when we were very little, such as how my room was the coldest in the house no matter what. This could be caused from how the ventilation was built for the house, so that wasn't anything too wild. Other things they said were hearing loud bangs on the other side of the house when they were home, how pantry doors and silverware drawers were being opened when they would come home and have the washer and dryer start up on their own. They don't remember any of this happening prior to me being born. As far as I'm aware, they never sold my soul to any demons, because we never sure had much luck or money. As far as the activity goes, I don't really remember any of this taking place, and feel like if I did, I would understand the magnitude of it all. But one instance I do recall is being around 7 years old and being at a close friend's house. We were sitting on the floor of his bedroom playing Yu-Gi-Oh! He had one of those small Nickelodeon TVs in there, and the remote was on the floor. While we were playing, the remote was going back and forth under his bed and towards ours. We just stared at this in awe, not realizing that it was absolutely insane and impossible, and just went about our lives as if nothing had happened. Moving into later childhood and teen years, things picked up. My sister had started to tell my mum and I that she was seeing shadows and felt uncomfortable. My mum also told us she was seeing shadows, and it was intermittent when this would occur. I had personally never seen what they were talking about and was thankful, and I recall during that time hearing footsteps outside of my room. We had since moved into a trailer due to some tragic life issues, and my mum would tell us that it was some animal under the flooring that caused the noise. I put full faith into that thought at the time, but looking back there was no way. The footsteps would remain constant until I would move out. I was in this home from 5 years old until about 22. Growing up, I would always stay the night at a friend's house for Halo LAN parties and try to recreate the food that we saw on Epic Meal Time. One of my friends had some paranormal things going on over there. I can't specifically tie these events to what I dealt with. I just think it was a wild coincidence. He had told us that he believed a little girl was haunting his house and had dealt with various things like noises and sightings. One specific night, I remember laying on the floor, going to bed after another solid gaming sesh, and could hear this faint carousel music. I put up with it for a few minutes and finally I said, "Hey, can you shut the volume off of your DS? I can't sleep." Turns out he was out cold, and he wasn't the reason I could hear the music. After I woke him up, we just sat there staring at each other. He told me he had toys in the attic, and he thought the little girl was playing with them. So like most level-headed teenage boys, we decided to do a ghost hunt. At the time, the show on Sci-Fi Ghost Hunters with the TAPS team was huge. We had this old-school recording device and would walk around the house asking questions and waiting for a response. We finally got the balls to crawl into the attic, where the noises had been coming from, and began to have a classic EVP session. It was pitch black outside of the small little flashlight we brought. There were about 5 of us seated on the beams, asking whatever came to our minds. After some time up there and no responses that we could hear of, we wrapped up and came down, but left the recorder up there for a period of time that escapes my memory. As we played the tape back, we went to the point where we shut the attic, and we were all back down and actually had caught a little girl saying, "Mummy?" And we were crapping ourselves. I mean, we found what we were looking for, but we didn't really think it would happen. Fast forward a bit to high school. My mum would ask me if I was moving shampoo bottles in her bathroom. As typical teenagers, I love doing pranks, but this wasn't me, and my sister isn't the kind of person who would do that. This would happen once a month or so. Along with this, we would have lights flick on and off. My mum would always find a way to debunk things as to not to scare us. The other major incident would be doors opening and closing, but it was only always my bedroom door. From where my dad sat most nights playing Team Fortress 2 well into the early morning hours, he could see my door. He would ask me in the morning if I happened to get up last night, and it was never me opening it. My mum had tried a few times to sage the house and cleanse it of the evil spirits, but this honestly did nothing at all. Activity never slowed down or picked up, as if she had never even tried at all. In high school, I decided to follow in the family footsteps and start a career in the fire/emergency services. I took a high school course for EMT and graduated with my EMT certification. I joined a volunteer fire department shortly after graduating to get some hands-on experience, with the hopes to eventually get a career. About 3 years after high school, my nana passed away. I was very close to her, and this was a sudden death. She had always been a big advocate for me pushing myself and achieving my dreams. I had landed a job at a large ambulance company and was eager to start, I had everything laid out the night before, like the first day of school, ready for my first day. Around 4 a.m. I was asleep in my room, and I remembered waking up to my door opening and a short figure standing in the doorway with no discernible features. As I stared at it, I wasn't scared or nervous and felt no malice. The door shut after 15 seconds or so, and I had just sat there for a bit, processing everything. This was the first time I had personally seen the shadow figures my family were talking about. That morning, I told my mum what happened, and she said that it wasn't her opening it. She suggested the thought that it could have been my nana checking on me on my first day. She was around 5'2" on a good day, so in my head that added up with what I saw, and I went about my life. Fast forward a few years, I'm now a firefighter paramedic in a career department and have proposed to my high school sweetheart. We just got our own apartment in a neighboring city and have our first pup, a wiener dog called Rocky. My fiancé was aware of some of the things that were happening to me and my family growing up, but we had no idea that things were going to continue once I moved out. Our lives in this apartment consisted of me working my rotation of 24 hours on a 48-hour shift, which is pretty standard firefighting schedule, and Erica was going to school to become a dental hygienist. This apartment is where I began to start connecting some dots, that maybe it wasn't just the house that had haunting issues. Small things would happen here and there. It was never when my fiancé was home. The apartment was about 900 square feet, so if there was a noise I would definitely hear it. The thing I would experience here were lights turning on and off, but they wouldn't be in the room I'm in. For instance, the bathroom would turn on and I would be in the kitchen. The toilet would flush on its own, and we had motion sensor rope lights in our small walk-in closet in our bedroom that would turn on in the middle of the night. I remember feeling like someone was with me, but I never felt like it was harmful, just like I was in a crowded room in a sense. I remember hearing female whispers, but would often chalk it up to being in an apartment, even though most of the place would be vacant during the day with my neighbors being at work. During this time, I began to have very traumatic calls at work, the biggest event being one where 2 toddlers were hit on the head by a train, ending one's life on impact. This caused my mental health to decline, and there was a strong correlation with this and the activity that surrounded me. I began to go through therapy to help with coping through work issues. Outside of these small events, nothing drastic happened in the short time we were in this apartment, and we had set our sights on purchasing a home and starting a family. By this time, Erica had graduated and began working in her desired field, and I was as well. We had gone home shopping and found the perfect house for us in a neighboring city that was near our jobs, family, and friends. Picking up from the apartment, we had moved into the new house and everything was perfect. We had finally made it. 2 kids from the trailer park with successful lives and a beautiful home. Things with work, however, continued to be difficult. I would go on several calls that involved juveniles taking their lives, and working in healthcare during COVID was one of the most miserable and draining things I've ever done. My mental health was at an all-time low, and I was going to therapy on a weekly basis. Through all of this, I never experienced anything at work, even though I spent so much time there. I feel like this was a catalyst for the events that followed. Once I was at my lowest was when things escalated to new heights. One of the earliest signs something was still going on involved an artsy bathroom sign and a wall-mounted toilet paper holder. My wife had this sign positioned right over this holder, and in theory in a normal household it shouldn't have any issues. We heard a loud bang one day and went to the small bathroom and saw the sign on the floor. Thinking it was odd, since no door was closed, no wind was coming through, we put it back and shut the door. About 2 minutes later, it fell again and landed directly on the holder. Then, it hit me. The thing is still here. The presence was still with me. This proceeded to happen over and over again in the next several weeks at completely random times, and each time striking the holder. It happened so much that it finally knocked the holder off the wall, and once it was removed, that sign hasn't moved in years since. Things began to happen more in the open and during the day. The first instance that was in front of my wife was in our side living room area, and my wife was cleaning the floors. We had a power surge in the kitchen, and her jacket flew off the back of a chair in the dining room, which is next to the kitchen. The table was directly between my wife and I, and we both saw this. Walking into the kitchen, and all the appliances had their times reset like a power surge, but nothing else in the house had any issues. This happened around 10 a.m., and she was very freaked out at this point, and it was then when I really couldn't continue to hide it. I'd found various reasons to play things off and cover for excuses, but this was unexplainable. At this point, I was still in monthly therapy sessions to deal with work-related issues, and my mental health had improved a bit. Things seemed to come in waves, as if it was building up strength, feeding on my weakness. Looking back, it felt like it would build up over several months and get progressively more constant and severe, and then dissipate for random amounts of time. It would ramp up with events like 1 to 3 times a month, then once a week, then back to a few times a week to daily. It would build strength and severity, and then go back to nothing. I would be downstairs in our 2-story home, gaming late at night, and having the lights turned on where I can see them. I would begin jokingly speaking into the open and say things like, "If you're gonna turn on the lights, you can pay some of the bill," trying to make light of what was happening. My wife had asked questions on the history of it, and I explained since I was a young child that I had issues. She began to ask if we could look into getting rid of this thing. I told her, unless it's causing harm, I'm not messing with it. The absolute terror of the unknown was enough for me to just deal with it. I was a decent horror buff at this point, even though my daily life was basically one. When thinking about things escalating, I always thought of Paranormal Activity and the scene where they put down flour and now you know the footsteps were goat hooves. You can't unsee that. I functioned heavily on the ignorance is bliss approach, but when it came to all of this, it probably wasn't the best idea. There was a lull for a few months, just long enough to give you some hope that things might be going back to normal, and at this point my wife and I began starting to try for a child. We were having infertility issues, and this would go on for about 2 years. Some of the things we experienced during this time are as follows. I told my wife goodnight and went to play some World of Warcraft in the office. The door was open down the hallway, and I walked closer to the door, and it shut in my face. I proceeded to open it and sit down like it had never happened. I truly tried my best to ignore it and move on. We both tried to function on the thought process of don't feed into it and hopefully it would just go away. My wife experienced things being thrown 2 different times. And to preface, she almost never saw things, or it would only happen when I was home. So for her to see something was significant. The first one was downstairs in our living room while I was upstairs gaming. I had a t-shirt on a coffee table and it was tossed across the room while she was sitting on the couch. The second was when she was showering. She had on our JBL speakers blasting Cardi B, and it was thrown off the bathroom counter and onto the floor. I was also home for this one. There were signs of the bigger events weaved into where the constant footsteps and light switches turned on. It also figured out how to turn on the TV and PS5 downstairs. We would wake in the morning and the TV or PlayStation would just be on and idling. Channels would never change and nothing would move on the screen. I finally got the dumb idea to try and record the downstairs activity while we slept. I bought 2 motion sensor cameras and had set them up near areas where things would often happen. When I had cameras recording, not a thing would occur. When I turned them off naturally would be the times when things would go bump downstairs. This, along with other examples, led me to believe it was an intelligent haunting. Things again dissipated and picked up like clockwork. This next experience was worse than it had been before. The 3 big notable ones that I will mention are as follows. Now at this point we had 2 wiener dogs, one called Rocky and the other Sully. I wanted bigger dogs and she wanted smaller, so we compromised and got 2 smaller dogs. My wife went to work out and I was upstairs folding laundry. It was around 11 a.m. She'd been gone for about 15 minutes at this point, and my dogs were upstairs running around and playing. Then I heard, in my wife's voice clear as day, "Boys, stop barking. It's just Mama." And they stop in their tracks. I was so confused because I was 100% sure she wasn't home. I called her really quick to see if she'd had stopped back just in case she forgot something, and she told me she had just pulled up to the gym. I left my room to go and investigate and found nothing. That was the only instance of things for the day. The next one I can recall was another midday experience where I was home alone. It was around noon, and I had just come downstairs for lunch. We had just recently had our anniversary, and there was a balloon in the house. The balloon had originally been in the dining room, and the exits of that room have approximately a 1-foot lip for the doorway to go to the next room. The balloon had left the room and was actively floating in front of me in the kitchen, slowly bobbing up and down and making its way to the back of the living room. For it to be able to leave the initial dining room, it had to be physically moved. It wouldn't have had any way to duck into the doorway. I just stood there watching this in disbelief. At this point, I had dealt with enough and decided to retaliate. I grabbed a knife from the butcher block and popped the balloon. I put the knife back, made some lunch, and went upstairs. I had one of the dogs in my lap watching some Twitch stream on my PC when I felt a burning sensation on my leg. This was about 15 minutes later. I was wearing long jogger-style pants and pulled them down to see what appeared to be 3 long scratch marks about 1 inch apart on my thigh. This was the point that scared the ever-loving crap out of me. After that, I just turned to the open room and apologized and said that we were even and would like to continue to try and live in harmony, and nothing else happened that day. The final experience in this stretch was a little more convoluted. At work, I had been going through a rough patch with very traumatic calls. I would tend to have very vivid night terrors after these. This batch had consisted of a few cases of juveniles taking their lives and another person versus train. This specific dream was different though. I was in my own house and heavy footsteps were sprinting for me. I was screaming my wife's name for help and banging on the walls, but no noise was coming out. I felt as if my mouth was being held shut and I was using my hands to pry my mouth free. I had actually awoke and was screaming my wife's name when I woke up, which messed both of us up. This was the peak of the activity for this stretch. After things died down for about a year, I had been talking with my therapist about the paranormal activity I was dealing with, and it was a big factor in my mental health. Dealing with death at work all day, and then coming home to where I'm supposed to be able to unwind and relax was almost worse than working most days. We had discussed the possibility of what this could be and came up with a poltergeist-style haunting, which fit the description from what I could find. It basically described it as a malignant haunting that can interact with objects and feeds off bad energy, which added up with all the depression I had been going through with work and the infertility issues we had been experiencing, even having a miscarriage. At this point, we were able to have a happy, healthy baby girl in December of 2022. I don't really recall much going on at this point. I would say about 6 months into her being around was when things began to pick back up again, as slowly as it had. Lights going on and off, footsteps, door handles jiggling to rooms we were in, the goes-to of the hauntings. We had lightly discussed the issue of having our daughter be in the same environment as this entity. Ever since the balloon incident, nothing violent or malicious had occurred, but I always had an uneasy feeling and never felt alone. Around her first birthday, things began to pick up, and we were back to a daily occurrence. I had tried to keep most of these to myself so as to not spook my wife. I figured if it was just me dealing with it, I could just bear the burden and move on to keep the peace of the house. For the first time in the history of this, I was at work on my 24th, and she was hearing things while I was away. She was putting our daughter down to bed and was hearing footsteps outside of her room and could see a shadow walking past the doorway. I remember her texting me as it was actively happening, saying she was done with this. Honestly, I couldn't blame her. I was at my wit's end as well. But going back to the whole question of what the hell do you do, the fear of the unknown paralyzed me. What happens if we do something and it doesn't work? The house isn't haunted. My wife isn't haunted. It's me. It had followed me from 4 different houses in 4 different cities and had no signs of stopping. I had begun doing some research into what the hell I needed to do. I began even asking co-workers if they had anything like this, and they thought I was absolutely crazy, and I don't blame them. My lieutenant kept asking me if I had any photo or video proof, and I told him that I tried once but never again. Once I knew what was in there, it would have been game over. For Christmas, my wife bought me an LED gamer tag sign that would light up in bright red. It actually came from overseas, so I had to Amazon order an American outlet adapter for it. Once it showed up, I plugged that bad boy in and it was beautiful. For the time being, I had it sitting on the floor in our computer room. This specific night, I had told my wife goodnight and went to go game it up for a bit. I turned on the PC, shut the door, and went downstairs to get some G Fuel and snacks. As I was walking up the stairs, I could see a red glow from under the door. The neon sign had been turned on while I was out of the room. Immediately, I unplugged it and went about my night. Before I left, I plugged it in the back and turned the remote upside down on the table. This was my own little messed up experiment to see if it was moving the remote and turn it on or not. In hindsight, it was dumb, but here we are. That morning when I woke up, it was on. I then unplugged it and went back to work. A few days had gone by with nothing. I started to see that LED sign as a ghostly gauge, basically. One night while I was at work, I got a text from my wife asking if I had left the sign on. I believe I lied and told her I had to ease her mind, but I knew damn well that I had not. After that, there was a stretch of nights when my wife would work long hours and I was home with our daughter. During these days, I would hear footsteps upstairs while we were downstairs and would begin to smell perfume. It was the same perfume that my nana would wear, and I haven't smelt that since she passed away many years ago now. I had also begun to hear a male voice with whispers of incoherent speech that sounded far away. Over these few days, the whispering got louder and louder to the point where it was undeniable I was hearing whispering. But it wasn't gibberish. Nothing made sense when I would hear it. Most noticeably would be when I was putting our daughter to bed and I was lying on the floor of her dark room till she dozed off. I would just hear it constantly, not knowing if it was just my nerves being absolutely shot or if it was all real at this point. I didn't tell my wife about this because yet again I felt that I should be the one to just bear the burden. But this was my breaking point. It was the beginning of February. Out of a shot of desperation, I tracked down my pastor from church growing up. My kid was at my parents' house for the day while I was catching up on some yard work. I drove down to a local gas station so I didn't have the conversation at the house. We limited as much recognition of the entity in the home as much as possible, and this was my way of escaping the call for help. I remember calling him and asking if he had some time to speak. He did remember me from when I would go as a kid, and I told him that I felt as though I had something paranormal going on with my life, and asked if he could listen and, hopefully, help. He was a little taken aback but obliged, and let me tell my entire story as I just have now. He had said, "Well, knowing you and the profession you're in, I'm leaning towards the fact that this is real and you aren't having a psychiatric issue." He offered to come out for a few days. He told me that he was going to contact a specific group of people he knew in the Catholic Church, whose job it was to deal with exorcisms and get some kind of advice on how to approach this. He gave me the confidence that we would solve it, and I began to cry. I had mixed emotions of terror and joy, hoping this would be the end, but having no clue about how it would go. I spoke with my wife about the ordeal, and the pastor was going to come and help us. He asked that we all be present in the house during the ceremony, and once he showed up to the house, he greeted us with a smile and said he was going to bless the house with us inside it. We walked with him to each room as he was saying prayers and tossing holy water throughout. The entire time I was waiting for the absolute worst to occur. Every horror movie you see at this point goes to absolute crap and someone ends up passing away. Once he had walked through the house and blessed each room, we went to the living room and locked hands and prayed. This process took about 45 minutes to an hour. I'm honestly not the biggest religious guy around, and mainly went to church because of family, but I was all in on this because we had no other choice. Father Doug then gave me the number to what I can describe as the Exorcist hotline. He said if things persist or get worse, to call them immediately. It's been about 6 months now at the time of writing this, and as I lay in my bed at work, things have stopped completely since that day. This is all 100% true, and I 100% have zero proof of writing this besides the account of my family and myself. Some people are skeptical of ghost stories. I'm just glad mine is over for now. I was inspired to put pen to paper, so to speak, to not forget this chapter in my life and have it logged, and I appreciate your time. Thank you for listening. Me and my brother were in a barn after dark. This barn in particular is kind of haunted, as it's next to an abandoned house, where the two owners passed away and are most likely buried outside. We had permission to be there since our parents were friends with the grandchildren of the two owners. We were in the barn after dark, and tried to see some sleeping birds, since barn swallows live in this barn. It has 2 doors. The second door is by the light switch but doesn't open, so we have to go to the light switch, making our way through the dark barn. So after we saw some sleeping baby birds, we decided to go through the barn to the other side to turn the light switch on. After we did so, we hung around for a while, basically doing nothing except chatting. Eventually we got bored, and I gave my brother my phone so that he could use the flashlight. Once he turned the lights off, he could navigate with it through the barn. I stayed by the front door of the barn waiting for his return. I suddenly hear him call my name, nervously. "Sam?" "Yeah?" "I was just making sure you were here." I could tell by his voice he was unnerved, but I didn't know what was unnerving him. I then saw him walking fast through the barn. I thought nothing of it as we opened the door and left. We were walking home as we lived near the barn, and when he suddenly turns to me and says, "Now that we're away from there, can I tell you something?" "Sure." I know when my brother is lying. He can barely do it and always bursts out laughing, but this time he looked terrified and had a shaky tone of voice. He then tells me what he saw in the barn that made him so unnerved. He was panning the flashlight around the barn. He quickly panned over a tall figure, said it was around 7 feet, towering over him, that it had this horrific lifeless face. He said it did have eyes but no mouth, and he quickly shined the flashlight in the same location and then nothing was there. That's when he said my name, thinking I was somehow pranking him. But then I told him I was at the front barn door. That's when he started freaking out. The other thing is, we both felt like we were being watched in the barn, but we really didn't think anything of it, since it's normal to get weird feelings like that. When the lights were off in the barn, I felt this weird lightheaded sensation, but I didn't automatically go, "Oh, that's a ghost messing with me." Nothing really happened after that, and I'm thankful neither of us have had to see that entity. I work at an escape room. It's a really fun job and I absolutely love it. The location used to be a house, and we have a lovely break room with a balcony overlooking a cemetery. We joke a lot about the building being haunted and have named the ghost after different characters in the rooms. Some days, it's more of a joke than others, but I have plenty of paranormal stories to share. There's one game of ours which has a tunnel you have to crawl through that leads to an open panel of the wall of the next room. I have a bird's eye view facing this open panelled wall from the security camera. The tunnel is tall enough to stand in the back of it, and with the entrance, exit, an actual tunnel in the shape of a U. I was running a game for a group of 7 people. I remember it was 7 because our rooms have a capacity of 8, and it was the peak of summer, so we blocked off the final spot as a courtesy, so it wouldn't be this group of 7 playing with a single stranger. if the 8th spot was booked. The team was doing great, and they exit the tunnel into the final room. They're figuring out the main puzzle of said room, and I look at the open panel, and when I look at the aforementioned camera, what do I see? The distinct shadow of someone standing in the tunnel. I find it odd, since I thought everyone had left the tunnel and there was no reason to go back. I count the people visible in the final room, and I count 7. I switch back to the tunnel cam to see if someone's inside, and of course now it's empty. I switch back to the camera where I can see everyone, and where the shadow originally was, and now there's nothing. I know this room like the back of my hand, and at this time had run it over 100 times. I know the layout, everything inside, and nothing could have cast that shadow. There is literally nothing in the tunnel. I very well could have miscounted people, but I just think it's a fun story to think about. One day, I was at home studying when I was in college. I had a big exam coming up and had forgotten my notes upstairs, specifically another notebook that I needed. So I went up the stairs to my bedroom. Since I knew where all my notebooks were, I didn't bother turning the light on. I entered my room, opened one of the drawers and took my notebook out, closed it, and everything was fine. But when I turned around to leave, I saw a very tall man with a big turban with a shiny stone on it. He was walking towards me, and I didn't even have time to comprehend what was going on when he walked through me. I stood there dumbfounded for a moment, unsure what had just happened, but I went back downstairs and continued studying and tried to put the incident at the back of my mind. But I couldn't. I just kept thinking about it. Who was that man that passed through me? I mean literally, went through my corporeal body. I was just left wondering, trying to find an explanation for this, and still to this day, I just don't know what it could have been. A paranormal entity of some kind? Intriguing, but I never saw them since. What do you guys think? My dad died of a heart attack at home and outside in an ambulance while suffering stage 4 lung cancer under chemo a year ago. We are not a very religious family, but since he died, the family has witnessed numerous events that are strange. Day of the funeral, Dad's casket was in our home. The room he was in was closed but not locked. 10 minutes before the ministers started the ceremony at home, 4 members of my family witnessed the key in the door turn and the door open wide, without the handle turning at all. Since then, my mother has experienced multiple moments of white feathers appearing attached to either her or items near her, usually when it's windy, yet the feathers seem to get stuck on seemingly obscure unstickable objects like a smooth floor, wind chimes outside the back door where he used to sit, and it landed on Mum's foot while using Dad's mower, appearing inside the car while she was driving, and while we were on holiday in a different country, it was a daily occurrence. Just now we were sitting on a windy, 50-meter squared balcony, and a white feather appeared below her chair. Mum freaks, walks inside, and there's a feather on the coffee table and another on her bed. Doors and windows were all closed. We have Googled it, and it seems white feathers are a common occurrence of those grieving. My rational brain says it must just be a random coincidence. But what do you guys think? Are we just getting good at noticing this? Or is there something stranger going on? The incident that truly scarred me for life, and that I will probably never forget, happened around 5 years ago. I was 19. My dad was out of town for his job, so I spent the evening with my mum, and we were calling my sister. 2 specific things happened this evening that I won't forget. First one was in my mum's bed. I was talking and playing Switch with my sister over the phone. My back was facing the wall, and in a moment I jumped out of bed petrified because I felt fingers touching my leg. My mum thought it was a bug or a spider, but I could feel the fingers and a pressure. I still remember the feeling of the fingers slowly moving in my skin, but the worst was yet to come. In my corridor, I have a broken door. When you close it, you have to push it till there's a clap, because otherwise it will just open itself. And also, when it's closed, it's very hard to open. You have to push it quite strongly. I went to the kitchen at around 12:30, and I came back to the corridor and shut it, pushed it all the way till I heard the click. I turned around, my back facing the door. I was on my way to the room when I heard a massive bang, like someone or something kicked the door. I turned around super fast to find my very hard-to-move door opened all the way. Many other scary things happened in that house, like scratches on my body, and my hair getting pulled out, and things being moved in my garage. But these are some of the most scary I've faced so far. When I was younger in the 2nd grade, it was Halloween night. My dad had taken me and my 2 older brothers, who are fraternal twins, out for Halloween. My dad dropped us off after we were done trick-or-treating back to my mum. I was taking a shower in the bathroom, and we had a stand-up shower with the glass closing door. I locked the bathroom door as I normally would. This is when I saw it, the Shadow Man. At first, his appearance was quick. His shadow came into the bathroom and ran across the wall, nothing more. I remember being scared and thinking, whose shadow was that? It's a small, square bathroom. And again, no one should have been able to get in. I hurried up with the rest of my shower and got out. Maybe this is odd timing, but right after I left, the corner of the shower door snagged the back of my foot and sliced it open. Not bad enough to need medical attention, but enough that there was a lot of blood. That night I went to sleep in my mum's bed. I had the bedroom light off, and the hallway light was on because I was still afraid of the dark. That's when I saw him again. His shadow ran down the hall into my room and vanished into the darkness. I don't remember being that afraid, but I was also very young and could have been so frightened I blacked out the rest of it. This was not the last encounter I would have with the Shadow Man. We eventually moved into another apartment complex. I was still too afraid of the dark, so I started sleeping with a nightlight. I'm pretty sure I didn't have the bedroom all to myself, as the Shadow Man would accompany me most every night. There he would be, standing on my wall. He never came off the wall, but he would always be there. I told my family about this and they believed me, as again my family is very prone to the paranormal. Unfortunately, there was nothing that could be done about it. He didn't hurt me or talk to me, he would just be there. I was scared every time, but I couldn't bring myself to turn off the nightlight. I was more afraid of the complete dark, and not knowing where he would be, than seeing him on the wall. I talked about him frequently so my family could tell you all about this to this day. The same apartment, a couple more paranormal things happened. My older brother, the oldest of the twin boys, would also see things. He would see what he claims were demonic dogs running down the hallways. One night I was even sleeping in my mum's bedroom on the floor with a little TV, with my little brother sleeping right next to me. We were moving out and so everything was mostly packed other than blankets and a few of our big square televisions. This was before flat screens came about. My mum was sleeping out in the living room, and I woke up in the middle of the night to the whole apartment being silent. I could see my mum down the hallway asleep on the floor, but then all of a sudden this thing was under her blanket. I don't even know what it was. It was by her feet, raising up under her blankets to a full stand. I don't remember much after this, probably got so scared I passed out, and I told my mum about it the next day, but she said she didn't know anything because she was asleep. Thankfully, nothing more came of it after that. When I was about 15, I went to the Faculty of Medicine, to the amphitheater where the students practiced dissecting bodies as part of a homework assignment. The brownish bodies impressed me a lot. To think that they once walked and talked like me, had names and friends and plans and illusions, and the students were cutting them down, listening to music, joking around, and throwing body parts at each other while saying, "Think fast." It seemed so disrespectful to me and made me feel very empathetic towards the deceased. After that, we went back to school. We were still in high school, and I began having what appeared to be an allergic reaction. I couldn't breathe, my arms twisted over my chest, and my friend took me to the infirmary where I got 2 shots of a medicine, and I didn't bother to ask what it was. At one point I got very scared and thought I was going to die because even after the shots I just kept on getting worse, and it felt like I was fading into a black and red spiral. When I thought, I don't want to die because I couldn't speak, a thundering voice yelled in my head that I wasn't, but in Spanish, my mother tongue. It immediately calmed me, and I thought, you're right, I'm not going to die. So confident in what I heard, not really thinking, wow, someone spoke in my head, but more like a confident acceptance of, yeah, you're right, I'm going to be okay. The medicine still took a few minutes after that to kick in, and the spiral faded away instantly. My conventional explanation was that it was just an allergic reaction, but I hadn't eaten anything out of the ordinary that day. My paranormal explanation is that someone from the facility who had passed away clung to me and maybe tried to take my life. Something in my empathy opened a connection somehow, maybe. These are bodies that no one claims and thus end up in medicine schools for kids to practice on. They're either criminals, addicts, or just solitary homeless. It also took me many years to acknowledge the voice I had heard, because who would believe me? It was a one-time event. It appeared right when I thought that was it for me, and had the power to calm me, although the medicine hadn't worked yet. It also spoke to me in a second person, as in, you are not going to die. It was very, very clear, and sounded like what you'd expect a supernatural voice to sound like aggressive but not cruel or scary. It sounded like many voices, perfectly in sync. Could it have been my guardian angel, or something more divine, intervening directly for me? Thinking of it makes me smile and feel immense gratitude. But what do you think? In the autumn of 2016, residing in Alberta, Canada, I found myself temporarily relegated to the basement due to renovations on the main floor. Prior to this occurrence, I had never encountered anything remotely paranormal. This particular incident stands as my sole brush with such phenomena. It was Wednesday morning, and the clock read 3 a.m. as I slumbered deeply. Abruptly, a dark, almost demonic female voice pierced the silence, calling out the name, Kathy. The suddenness of it jolted me awake, causing me to sit bolt upright in bed. Hastily, I flicked on the bedroom lights, expecting to confront whatever entity had seemingly intruded upon my space. But there was nothing there. The only Kathy in my life was my ex-mother-in-law, a woman of a gentle disposition. With a sense of bewilderment, I searched the basement and then the main floor for any signs of electronic devices left on, but found none. I even checked outside, half expecting to encounter my young neighbors, but the hours seemed too unreasonable even for them. Eventually, I managed to calm my nerves and returned to sleep. Approximately 3 weeks later, during another night's slumber, I was visited by a vision of an elderly Native American woman, her presence distinctly unfamiliar to me. She stood silently beside one of the basement doors, her age evident in her long, graying hair and spectacles adorned in a traditional jacket adorned with a dreamcatcher emblem. Before I could comprehend the significance of her appearance, my alarm interrupted, signaling the start of another workday. In the time both preceding and following these incidents, my life remained devoid of any further brushes with the paranormal. To this day, the reason for these occurrences eludes me. Despite dwelling in the basement for several more years afterwards, I never encountered anything similar. Should anyone have any insight into these inexplicable events, I am eager to hear. Hey guys, it's Mort here, and thank you so much for listening. If you enjoyed these stories, feel free to check out more on screen shortly. A huge thanks as always to my members and patrons whose names can be seen on screen, and if you'd like to help support the channel and get extra perks, Find out more by following that link. But until then, stay awesome. I'll see you in the next one.